Cushion it enough not to make a flat area, and I'm going to turn it every now and again to allow the whole surface to dry thoroughly. Now that my leaf bead has had a chance to dry on the outside, I need to remove it from the straw, which I oiled earlier, so that the air can get to the inside of the leaf bead and dry out properly. So to get my bead off of here, I'm going to support the whole thing with my fingers down the side of the whole bead, and I'm going to very gently twist and pull until it comes away, and then we're going to put this on the whole thing on the hot plate. Don't put this on the hot plate, obviously, for obvious reasons. You're going to melt your plastic. And now we'll get this good and dry so that we can then attend to the edges if we need to. We need to make sure the edges are cleaned up well before we fire the piece, and so we're going to put our dust mask on. And sometimes it's quite difficult to get in around this point with the nail file, because you can cut into the rest of the bead without meaning to. So sometimes what I'll do is actually get in there with a toothpick and begin to refine the edges and any rough pieces that need to come off, because the toothpick is very gently abrasive, very mild abrasive, and we can use that to get in there without scuffing up the texture of the lower part of the bead. And then I might want to switch to using my nail file for these rough edges here. In this demonstration we're going to be using the Art Clay 650, Art Clay Silver 650, and the 10-gram package that we've sent you is enough to make 2 pendants, okay? So make sure you split it up and have a practice run with your polymer clay to figure out what you're going to do. And we're going to be making a pendant. There's a couple of examples here. So this particular project is a pendant from Found Textures. Okay, so you need to be innovative and have a good look around you. This is something we haven't provided for you. And we're going to be piping some syringe onto the surface, so you need to factor that into your design. The bail for the pendant is going to be wrapped around a straw. Okay, so, and the bail can run from the front to the back like this, or from the back to the front, and you'll get this contrasting texture appearing at the front there. We don't mind which way it goes, and we're going to be wrapping it around the straw to maintain that loop while it dries, and then removing the straw before we fire it. So these will be everything you need for your project: your Art Clay 650, your rolling out materials, the ever-present olive oil, some slip, and you'll see what for in a minute, and a found texture of some sort. So I recommend that you use some polymer clay to practice your found textures first to see what you're going to get, and you've really got to be careful not to cut too deep with your textures depending on what you're using. So make sure you don't cut all the way through your clay. Have a good practice in your polymer first, and try and pick something that doesn't shed too much. Sometimes grasses can look great, but they can leave heaps of debris in your clay, which doesn't matter so much if you're going to be firing it. It will burn away. But if you have any clay left over and you cut off any excess and put it back in your package and it's got that debris, you're going to have lumps and bumps in your clay that you roll out the next time. So I'm going to start rolling my clay down to 4 cards thick. So now I'm ready to do my texturing, and I need to be very careful not to cut too deep with my wood. I like this wood and I've been using it quite a bit now. So I'm putting a little bit of oil on there, and I'm judging carefully how deep my cuts are going. I'm doing a bit of a random okay, and then I'm going to use my card to cut my shape. And now I need to get my piece of clay onto my straw. So I'm going to very carefully lift it up, trying not to scooch the back. And then I'm going to lay the narrow end up here. And yours can be whatever shape you want. And I'm going to use my slip to just help to glue everything together. Just a little dab on there. Bring it right round in contact with the base piece. Now you've got a couple of options. If you let the piece dry, find a background texture for you. If you let the piece dry this way, okay, you're going to get a flat looking front. If you let the piece dry this way, you're going to have a slight curve to the front because of the way it's draping over the straw. But if you do it this way, you really want to make sure that that back is still in contact underneath at the back, that it hasn't pulled away when you've laid it down and it's gone into this curve. Make sure the back point is still touching the clay so that your chain or piece of leather can't slip out if there's a gap behind there. And if we need to, once this is dry, we can attend to the edges a little bit and neaten the whole thing up. And then once it's dry, we're going to come back to it and put on the syringe decoration once it's dried and we've attended to the edges. Another option, if you feel like your straw is too wide a loop for you for such a small amount of clay, is to take a couple of toothpicks, really anything that's the right size that will help the clay to stay in place while it dries in that loop shape. So what I do in this instance is take my clay, and it's always a good idea to work on a card or something you can move around, because I'm not going to want to disturb it once it's on there. And this will give me a smaller loop that might be more proportional for the amount of clay you're using. So you've got a little bit of design freedom here. So that's the slightly smaller loop option. Now whenever I'm adding syringe, I usually work on a playing card. Let's find a flattish one, there we go. So that I've got a work surface that I can move around. If I was working down here and I'm trying to add syringe on here and I've got my fingers trying to turn this thing, I'm in danger of rubbing off or smearing the syringe that I've just put on there. So a movable work mat here is a good plan. Top tip. Wherever we're adding the syringe, which is fresh clay, onto the dried clay, we're going to want a little bit of water or slip. And I'm just going to keep it very basic. We don't need to see a highly embellished piece, but we do need to see that it's stayed in place so that you've remembered to use your slip so that it's stayed in place after it's fired and polished. Now, some people use the syringes this way. I find and that's fine. I find I've got more control if I hold it this way and my thumb is up here pushing the plunger, and I'm kind of resting down a bit more. I can rest on this knuckle here a bit easier, and I'm quite close to the area that I'm trying to control. I find that if I'm up here and pushing, I'm quite a long way away from where I'm trying to actually add the element, and there's an awful lot of movement that's going on there, so getting in close means I've got a bit more control. Just make sure this is working. Yep. So I'm getting in close and laying down the lines here. When I get to the end, I'm going to scoop over the edge, okay, to cut off the area, the line of syringe, cut it off, bring it to an end. If you don't like something you've done, you can simply remove it with your toothpick. And you can't put it back in your syringe though, okay? Don't make the mistake of pulling out the plunger and trying to put your clay back in. You'll end up with a serious airlock going on in there. And my slip is drying out quite quickly. And I didn't like the way that had come out, so I just took it off. I'm going back in again. And it's curling up at the ends, so I want to... There, that's better. So I'm kind of squeezing it out and laying it down rather than dragging and pulling at it. And a little bit more slip. Just do this last little bit along here. And sometimes you can actually get in there with a narrow paintbrush. This is a little bit on the large side. And straighten up your lines if you need to. And this will also help to seal all those edges down against the dried clay. Okay, so we're going to let that dry, and then that's ready for firing. This is our stone setting project, and we're going to be using a small 3mm CZ, which can be fired in place, set in the clay. And we're going to add a loop onto the back of the piece for the pendant to hang from. And it's going to be 2 layers so that there's enough depth to contain the depth of the stone without it sticking out the back and scratching you. So I'm going to use, so you're going to need a texture. I'm going to use my ever-present wallpaper, a couple of different sized cutters to make it, in this instance I've used the stars. I'm going to use some ovals now. You'll need some tweezers to enable you to pick up your little stone and get it in the setting, some slip to glue the 2 pieces together when you're working on it, your cards, your general rolling out equipment. And we're going to be working with art clay, 650 here. And you should be able to make this, remember you've got to get 2 pendants out of your 10 grams of art clay silver. So you should be able to make this out of about 4 or 5 grams of clay. So choose carefully when you choose your cutter sizes. And it's very easy to lose these little CZs around your work surface. So quite often what I'll do is take my polymer clay, make it into a point here and pick up the stone so that I can set it aside and I know where it's going to be then. It's not going to get rolled into my clay or disappear off onto the floor. So now I'm going to start rolling out my 4 or 5 grams of art clay 650 with a little bit of oil on the backing texture. And I'm going to go down to about 4 or 5 cards thick. That's going to depend on your texture. Let's go a little bit wider. So now we're down to 4 cards, and I'm going to use my wallpaper texture, a little bit of oil on the surface to stop it sticking, face down, and we're going to roll firmly from the middle up, back to the middle and down. And now I'm going to use my cutters, which I've oiled. Push down, little twist to let go, and then the second layer, the smaller one. Push down, little twist to let go, to release the edges, and now we're going to wrap up our excess so it's not busy drying out. Now I need to use some slip here to join the 2 pieces together. So I'm going to make sure I'm using the correct pot of slip, which will be the one that I've marked with Art Clay 650 plus or 3, can all be mixed together in the same pot. And I've already added a little bit of water here, so I've got a nice creamy paste. So that's ready to go. And now I'm going to lift up my smaller piece very carefully without distorting it, and flip it over so that I can get some slip onto the back of the piece. So that when I bring them into contact with each other, they're going to be stuck together nicely. When I get them lined up where I want them to be, I'm going to apply a small amount of pressure, not enough to distort the surface and affect the texture, but just enough to bring them in firmly into contact with each other. Now I need to take my cutter and make the hole all the way through both layers for my stone to sit in. Straight down in there, little twist to let go. And now I'm going to take my stone and I'm going to make sure I place it in there with the point downwards. So the point needs to be sitting down in that hole for me. And if the hole is the right size, the stone will actually sit on the surface. So we need to push it down in there. And I'm not going to use a sharp, pointy, slippery thing like my tweezers, which could easily slide across the surface and gouge my clay. Instead, I'm going to switch back to the hole cutter and push down on the entire surface of the stone, straight down in there, until the stone is below the surface of the clay. And the way to check if you've got it at the right height is to look at it sideways on and make sure that that stone is not sticking up above the surface of the clay. And that way, when we fire this, the shrinkage of the clay will hold the stone in place for us. Now, there's a couple of different options. What we're going to do is make a sort of snake shape and attach it on the back. And the really crucial thing with pendants and also brooches is that the loop or the pin, if it's a brooch, needs to be in the top third of the piece. So where the chain goes through needs to be up here, because if it's in the middle, then the piece is going to tip forward when you're wearing it. The same goes for a brooch. It always needs to be in the top third. So we want to really make sure that that raised area is going to be up somewhere near the top so that it doesn't tip forward when you're hanging it. You've got other options. We're going to show you how to do a sort of tapered snake like this, but you could also do a flat panel. And I'm hoping that once you've seen this demonstrated, you'd be able to visualise how to roll out a flat sheet and apply the same techniques to something that's rolled out sheet of clay. So let's go ahead and get that started. We're going to be using the art clay, so you should have retained a tiny, tiny piece. It's not going to take very much, so I hope you had some left over. And to make this little snake shape, I'm going to use a piece of Perspex. And now this could just as easily be a CD lid. They break off all the time anyway, so you could use a clear plastic CD lid to do the same job. And before I start to roll it out, I'm going to get my pendant set up where I want it, because once I've rolled out this little snake, it's going to be drying quite quickly. So let's get this organised. Now what I'm going to do is turn it over and make sure my loop is going to go in the top. Now that's a good thing to notice. The little hole here is not quite circular, so I'm going to get in there with the toothpick and very, very gently round up this edge. But I'm going to be very careful not to push my stone out. There's just a little snag of clay stuck around the edge there because we want a nice clean looking hole on the back there. I'm not making any contact with the point of that stone so that I don't push it out. Okay, so I need my loop to be in the top third, and I've got to decide how high I want it to be. I think this might be a little bit high for this size of pendant, so I'm going to switch to a cocktail stick, which will give me a nice shallow raised area. But I'm going to have a fresh piece of clay in a minute that I'm trying to attach to this, and as you can see it's already kind of rolling about. So what I'm going to do is take a couple of little pieces of polymer clay and put them either side of my pendant on a movable work surface, okay, so that I can move this around easier than moving my pendant around if I need to get to a different angle. So having the polymer either side of my pendant at the top there allows me to come in then with my toothpick and push that down, and the whole thing is going to stay put. Nothing's sliding around then when I'm trying to get my bail on the top. So now I'm ready to go ahead and roll out my little snake of clay. I'm using my Perspex here, and no oil.